who endured for the race that you hold the closest. For me, that person is B. Bradford, who without I would not have been nominated for this award, and B met me at arguably my most broken, my most vulnerable, and has seen me through to this moment right here. Thank you, B. To Jesse Aquino and Brenna Chase, who became kindred spirits, fast friends, and were instrumental in getting me here today, I say thank you, truly. I'm so honored to know you. And finally, there's an old adage about not being able to love anyone else if you can't love yourself first. And I'm here to tell you that once in a great while, miraculously, there may be somebody who enters your life who is willing to love you while you're in the process of learning to love yourself. I've been very fortunate to meet that person, and 4 years later, he's still here. I'd like to say thank you, and I love you, to Leo Watts, sitting in the very back row. Who has the audacity to love me unapologetically. So, thank you all, and I guess let's get this thing started. So hi, everybody. I'm Jahaira Dialto, and it is an absolute honor to be here. Before I launch into this thing too heavily, there's going to be a little bit of interactive stuff, because I'm big on the interactive stuff. Ask my coworkers about me. I'd like for everybody who is able to just, for a second, take a look in front of you, take a look behind you, take a look to the left of you, and take a look to the right of you. And there are two things that I want you to bear in mind as a result of having done that. The first being, today, on this day, you are sitting amongst greatness. The second thing being, you, right where you are a critical component of the greatness that comprises this room. And see, receiving an award like that, I have to tell you, recognition is a beautiful thing, but I think that most of the people in this room would agree with me when I say that I'm not as invested in recognition as I am in liberation. And what liberation looks like to me is imbuing our children with the ability to inspect and access and interrogate their emotions to such an overarching degree that the idea of feeling the need to act upon violence won't even occur to them. I want them to be so whole in their being and have such tools at their disposal that something like that won't even enter their minds. I want to live in that world. I strive to live in that world. And until we live in that world, I will be here doing this work. So, as Madam Attorney General so eloquently said, I do a lot of work on behalf of marginalized communities, and I do this because I'm someone who checks a lot of boxes. I am an immigrant. I am a person with a disability. I am a person of color. And I am a woman who arrived at womanhood by way of a transgender journey. If you feel the need to add and a partridge in a pear tree to the end of that, I won't blame you. It's a common feeling. So yeah, I check a lot of boxes, and my desire has been to be a voice for those who are voiceless and have been voiceless, typically. So I look at something like the Victim Bill of Rights, which is now 35 years old, could probably use some eye cream, and I say to myself, where were we 35 years ago? What did it mean to be a victim 35 years ago? And I had the opportunity to sit with Jesse and a number of spectacular MOVA employees at dinner last night, and we had that conversation, People who would hear that, you guys can get over it, you can get through it, it's not that big a deal, maybe put on some lipstick, maybe keep the house vacuumed. Everything except you didn't deserve what happened to you. And I look at where we are now, and we kind of had sort of a lively discussion around what's changed. Well, things have changed, and things haven't. What I know to be true is that what we have now, that we didn't have 35 years ago, overwhelmingly so, are options. We have options. We have agencies. We have numbers. We have resources. There's places to go, places who will hear you. And really, at the end of the day, as a survivor, and even as a human, all any of us truly want is to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged, to be affirmed. That's the desire, the baseline desire. And so that's what I believe we have today that we didn't have before. Is there more work to be done? Absolutely. But it shouldn't negate the strides that we've made. I'm grateful for those strides. I'm alive today because of those strides. So when I was first approached about the possibility of keynoting, one of the things that the powers that be said to me was, would I like to send in, my notes, my speech, have them go over it, have them take a look. And I told them that I don't write speeches. I have no notes. I have no platitudes. I have no cute anecdotes. I have none of that. What I did bring today is my truth. And I believe that the truth, unfettered and unfiltered, is always enough. Each and every person in this room today is here because your truth, your lived experience, by whatever means that happened to you, led you to this place. Some of you are survivors. Some of you are survivor adjacent. Some of you may have just noticed the inequity present in these communities, in these populations, and felt convicted to do something about it. We're all here trying to change our little corner of the world. And I am too. When you get past all of the boxes that I check, my story is no different from any other survivors. Mine is the story of a person who lost hope, and a person who found hope, and then a person who became hope. Each and every one of you serves as a possibility example of what a life can become. I had those possibilities before me at my lowest moment, and that's how I arrived here. And every person that you serve, every person that you advocate for, whether it be behind a desk or in the street, by whatever means you do the work that you do, you are serving as a possibility model. And it is through you that somebody can be inspired to be greater than where they are now. It's no small potatoes, and it's not a light responsibility. For me, it's almost a typical stereotype, if you will, that abuse begins when you're groomed for it. We talk a lot about grooming and sort of the precepts that are set in motion to create vulnerabilities so that sustained abuse might take place. And for me, the grooming was more societal than it was individual. My journey to womanhood began my sophomore year of high school at 16 years old in 1996. And I didn't have examples of what healthy relationships looked like. I didn't have a me somewhere off in the distance that was in this super affirming and confirming and wildly healthy relationship. I didn't have a hero. And so I found myself at a young age falling into relationships, if one would call it that at a teenage year, with people who weren't of quality, who weren't particularly kind or generous or compassionate. I found myself in relationships with violent people. And I didn't stay because I loved them, and I didn't stay because I was so devoted. I stayed because if I have a boyfriend, that's one more way in which I am a girlfriend, which means it's one more way that I'm validated as a girl. See, the problem that most trans women face is railing against the narrative that we were born men and we became women. I'd like to publicly inform all of you, I was not born a man. I was not born voting and changing a tire. I was born a baby who became a girl, who became a woman, and lived in a world that couldn't see that at the time. And when you don't have the luxury as a child of being told that you're beautiful, and being told that you're pretty, and being told that you're special, and being told that you have to be careful sometimes of boys because boys will break your heart. You learn those lessons in alternative means. And so for me, it became doing whatever I could to affirm my womanhood in a world that rarely did. Things are much different now, and I feel wonderful about the fact that there are people, and some of your children will grow up in a world never knowing about the time when, in the state of Massachusetts, accessing a bathroom could be an arrestable offense. Thank God we got past that one. I feel great about the fact that we're seeing young people allowed to access their most authentic self and have that be affirmed, and recognizing that expressing oneself through gender is something that comes incredibly naturally to young people. But it wasn't always like that, and I'm from a generation where it wasn't always like that. I'm also tacitly aware of the fact that most people, well, many people, even some of you in this room, may have never encountered or had an encounter with someone whom you knew was of the trans experience prior to this moment. I actually welcome that. I think that's awesome. And I hope you will attend our workshop later, because there's a lot more where this came from. But to give you some sense of why I'm here, and why, as it was said, I show up for vulnerable populations, in particular the trans community, is because as a trans woman who is also of color, I am twice as likely to experience intimate partner violence in my lifetime. As a trans person of color, I am twice as likely to experience sexual assault in my lifetime. And let me be very clear, when I say that, I'm citing the statistic that says 1 in 2 trans women of color will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. And as a trans woman of color, living in the United States, my life expectancy is 35 years old. I am now 5 years beyond how long I was supposed to live. She's a Bostonian. And when I say that, please understand, it's not because I made all the right decisions. It's not because I went left every time I was supposed to go left. It's not because I've got some inner secrets and I'm some kind of freaking gender Yoda with all the answers to the universe. That's not what this is at all. It is sheer luck of the draw that I've made it. It's not because I'm so skilled. There are people far more brilliant than I could ever become who didn't get to see this age. And it's not because they were trying to fool someone. It's not because they were dressed provocatively. It's not because they were trying to get one over. It's because a violent individual brutalized them. We have to get past this place of putting the onus on our victims. And I know that by and large, we've gotten there as far as our cisgender, I'm going to explain that in a minute, stay with me, our cisgender compatriots. But when it comes to the trans community, the narrative is frequently, well, did you tell them? Did they know? Were you seducing them? It's erroneous, and it's pervasive, and it stinks. And my mission, so to speak, is to open up a dialogue around a subject that very few people, well, I won't say very few, but few people have an overarching awareness of. There are a lot of questions when it comes to the trans community, and I am not a believer that one should remain in ignorance if an opportunity exists for them not to. And so I seek to be the person with whom all of your problematic and scary and reticent questions can obtain an answer to. That's what I'm here for. So now we get to decide, or at least pontificate on, what the next 35 years looks like for us. For us as survivors, for us as providers, for us as advocates. And this is a real conversation, because we're not just merrily rolling along for this ride. We get to be active participants in this thing. And so for me, I want to know that the most marginalized and the most vulnerable and those who are the most afraid to speak up because encounters that they've had haven't lent themselves to that being a productive decision. I want to know that their voices get a say in what the duration of their lives look like. I want to know that the people in this room, and all of us are at best conduits, we are the pit stop on the road of someone else's journey. We are a gateway to the possibility of who they might become. We are the reminder that who they are, as they are, has merit and value and substance, and that they too are worthy of all the great things that this life has to offer. I want all of us to find our way to those populations. And when we encounter those populations, I'd like for us to remind them of their humanity. Because as somebody who has traversed the journey from victim to survivor, the first thing I believed I lost was my humanity. You see, I didn't grow up, as I said before, seeing examples of me. Ergo, I didn't believe that people like me were deserving of things like justice and like hope and like compassion and empathy and affirmation and validation. I didn't know. And it's such a hard thing to have to say, and I'm laying myself prostrate before y'all right now because I genuinely didn't know. I subscribe to every pattern and every pathology of every kind of abuse you can imagine. I subjected myself to survival sex work because there was a horrible trifecta in the 90s as far as if your name didn't match your ID, you couldn't get work, but you needed to have work, to have money, to change your name, and you needed to change your name in order to get an ID, but to get an ID, you needed a job, and it all went wrong from there. And so I resorted to necessary, survivalistic, but granted, for me at least, in terms of my own narrative, rather nefarious means in order to sustain myself. Fish gotta swim, birds gotta fly, and a chick gotta eat. That's just how it was. I lived in that time. Thank you. I felt those snaps. And so it created a dialogue in me that so long as I was surviving, I was doing okay. So many of my girlfriends and sisters, I'm reminded of Rita Hester, November 28th, 1998, stabbed 24 times in her chest. When the police found her in Alston, there was such a degree of overkill that her breast implant was laying outside of her body. Her murder has never been solved. And so just the fact that I was able to wake up every morning and try again felt to me like it was enough. But I continued to insert myself into horribly violent scenarios that I claimed were relationships. And this pattern continued until 2015, really, when I found myself fleeing violence for the last time. I was 2 days away from having to go to a homeless shelter when SafeLink opened up, and I saw that the Elizabeth Freeman Center in Pittsfield had a bed available. Parenthetically, it should be mentioned that I had never heard of Pittsfield. And if you've ever been to Pittsfield, well, I'm glad you're here. It's a sleepy little town. They call it a city. Who the hell am I to step on anyone's dream? But I found my way there to the hills and valleys, literally and figuratively. And I lived in their emergency shelter for 10 months, upon which I was able to secure my own place. And prior to that, I will say, upon which I was able to witness what it is that y'all do here. I was able to witness in real time people who had the resources and the knowledge and the wherewithal, and most of all, the heart to see somebody at the lowest point in their life and to be able to say, you know, this is a chapter in your book, but it's not the whole book. And it was upon seeing that I realized that the compassion and empathy and generosity that, and I don't say this with hubris, don't get me wrong, but that I had exuded essentially my whole life was actually a gig that I could get paid for. I looked at these women and I saw the potential of who I could be, and I saw that I could be more than just my body and more than just my quick wit and more than just my story, that I could be that for somebody else, what these incredible people were for me. So I got myself into my own place, and I waited out a year, and I enrolled in school, and I came back to Elizabeth Freeman Center, and I stand before you now an intimate partner violence and sexual assault counselor. As I said in the beginning, I know what it is to lose hope and gain hope and then become hope. I now get to be for other people what somebody was for me. And I don't look at it as giving back. I'm not a big fan of giving back. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm just not, because generally, the people that gave to me in the first place have enough. They don't require me to give back. They had it to begin with, so what the hell do they need it back from me? But I fervently believe in the model of paying it forward. I absolutely believe in offering to somebody else what was provided for me at a time of my own desperation. And now I get to look in the eyes of someone who is desperate and say, it doesn't end here. All of us know some permutation of that story. It's why we continue to show up. It's why we put on pantyhose and sensible shoes at 9 in the morning to come to places like this and sit through long speeches. I appreciate y'all, I want you to know. It's very easy to get caught up in the mindset of just, this is what I do, and I'm happy to do it, and I don't really need or want or desire acknowledgement or recognition or accolades. I get it. I'm one of those people. But I'm standing in a room full of heroes. And I want you to know that that is who you are. To me, to everyone that you serve, even the ones who haven't accessed gratitude yet, even the ones who are on your, I hear it, the ones who are on your last nerve, it's especially them. Because lacking the language doesn't mean lacking the feeling. Keep showing up. Keep rising in the face of everything pushing back against you. The bureaucracy, the red tape, the barriers, the problems, the antipathy, all of it. Keep showing up because you are a living example of what 35 years of effort has managed to accomplish. So just imagine what you can do with 35 more. Thank you.